The morning of August 17th, 1943, dawned cold over the English countryside. At Thorpe Abbott's airfield, Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal stood beneath the massive aluminum belly of his B-17 Flying Fortress, watching mechanics make final checks. Around him, 376 other bombers growled to life, their 4 Wright Cyclone engines creating a symphony of raw power that shook the ground. Rosie was 23 years old. In his pocket, he carried a photograph of a girl back in Brooklyn who didn't know he loved her. In 6 hours, he would witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The mission was Schweinfurt-Regensburg, a double strike deep into the heart of Nazi Germany to cripple their ball-bearing production. It was the kind of mission that made even veteran pilots go quiet during briefing. The route would take them 450 miles into German territory, far beyond the range of fighter escort. They would be alone in the sky. Slow-moving targets for the Luftwaffe's finest. Flying coffins, the German pilots called them. They had earned the right to mock. The B-17 was a lumbering giant, a 4-engine beast that cruised at just 182 miles per hour when fully loaded with bombs. In contrast, the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf 190 fighters that would soon swarm them could reach speeds of 380 miles per hour. It was like watching cheetahs circle elephants. Captain Wilhelm Streib of Jagdgeschwader 3 had shot down 17 Allied bombers by that summer. He told his wingmen that attacking B-17 seconds was like shooting pigeons. On the morning of August 17th, he sat in the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf at an airfield near Stuttgart, waiting for the radar stations to confirm what they already knew was coming. Another American daylight raid. Another turkey shoot. The German pilots had reason for their confidence. Just 6 days earlier, on August 11th, a raid on the Ruhr Valley had cost the Americans 25 bombers in a single mission. The math was simple and brutal. At this rate, entire squadrons would be wiped out before completing their required 25 missions. The average life expectancy of a B-17 crew was just 11 missions. But the Americans had overlooked one crucial detail in their intelligence briefings, something that would become devastatingly clear in the skies over Germany that day. The B-17 wasn't designed to outrun fighters. It was designed to make attackers pay in blood. As Rosie's bomber, nicknamed Rosie's Riveters, lifted off from the runway at 9:15 a.m., he could see the formation assembling a massive aerial armada stretching across the sky like a metallic cloud. From the ground, it looked invincible. From inside the cramped fuselage, it felt like riding a bomb wrapped in aluminum foil. Technical Sergeant Michael Irish O'Brien manned the top turret gun behind the cockpit. He was a former Golden Gloves boxer from South Boston, with hands scarred from 100 street fights. Now those same hands gripped twin, 50 caliber machine guns capable of firing 750 rounds per minute. Each bullet weighed half a pound and could punch through an engine block at 400 yards. "How you feeling, Irish?" Rosie called over the intercom as they climbed through 10,000 feet. "Like I'm about to get paid back for every sin I ever committed, Lieutenant," Irish replied, his breath already forming ice crystals in the -50-degree air. Plus, interest. Below them, the English Channel glittered in the morning Sunday. It would be the last friendly territory they would see for hours. As they crossed into Belgium airspace at 11:20 a.m., the radio crackled with the voice of the lead navigator. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high. Estimate 3-0 plus." Rosie felt his throat tighten. 30 fighters, and they were still 200 miles from the target. Through the cockpit glass, he watched the specks materialize into the distinctive silhouettes of Messerschmitts, their noses painted with the predatory shark teeth that had become synonymous with the Luftwaffe's fighter wings. They circled above the bomber formation, like wolves studying a herd. Captain Streib pushed his Focke-Wulf into a dive, adrenaline singing through his veins. He had executed this attack profile dozens of times. Dive from above and behind, out of the gunner's range. Build up speed to 400 miles per hour, close to 200 yards, unleash the 20mm cannons, watch the bomber's wing explode, then break away before the surrounding aircraft could respond. He selected his target, a B-17, on the formation's edge, slightly out of position. A straggler. Easy prey. But as Stribe's finger tensed on the firing button, something unexpected happened. The entire bomber formation shifted. Like a school of fish sensing a predator, the B-17 seconds tightened their positions, overlapping their fields of fire. Suddenly, Stribe wasn't facing one bomber. He was facing 13 interlocking guns, all tracking his approach. What the German pilots didn't fully understand, what their intelligence officers had underestimated, was that each B-17 carried 10 defensive positions: nose, tail, ball turret, waist guns, and more. When properly positioned, a combat box formation of bombers could create a sphere of fire so dense that nothing could penetrate it without being hit. The Americans called it mutual protection. The Germans were about to call it something else entirely: a death trap. Stribe pressed his attack anyway. He was Luftwaffe elite, an ace who had survived 2 years of aerial combat. He had faced British Spitfires and Russian Yaks. How dangerous could a slow bomber be? He found out 3 seconds later. Captain Wilhelm Stribe's Focke-Wulf reached 400 miles per hour as he screamed down toward the B-17 formation. His gloved finger squeezed the trigger. 20mm cannon shells erupted from his wings, each one capable of tearing through aluminum like paper. But in that same instant, something happened that would be forever burned into his memory. The sky exploded with tracer fire, not from one gun, not from two. From every B-17 inches his field of vision. The air became solid with bullets, a wall of steel moving at 2,900 feet per second. Each 50 caliber round glowed red hot as it streaked past his canopy. And there were hundreds of them, thousands of them, creating geometric patterns of death that looked almost beautiful. Almost. The first round punched through his engine, cowling with a sound like a hammer striking an anvil. The second shattered his canopy, filling his cockpit with freezing wind and glass fragments. The third, he never knew where the third one went. But suddenly his control stick felt wrong, mushy, unresponsive. Stribe yanked his fighter into a violent brake, his vision graying from the G-forces. Below him, his intended target flew on, unscathed. He had fired 37 cannon shells. Not one had found its mark. But the American gunners? They had only needed 3. Thick, black smoke poured from Stribe's engine as he fought to keep his fighter level. Oil sprayed across his windscreen. The temperature gauge climbed into the red. He was 20 miles inside Allied bomber formation, his aircraft dying beneath him, and he suddenly understood with crystal clarity that the hunting grounds had become a battlefield. He barely made it back to his airfield, his Focke-Wulf trailing smoke like a wounded dragon. As ground crew helped him from the cockpit, his hands were shaking not from cold, but from the realization of what he had just survived. "They were waiting for us," he told his squadron commander, still breathing hard. "They knew exactly what we would do. The formation, it's not defensive. It's a trap." Back in the bomber stream, Irish O'Brien's world had compressed to a bubble of violence no larger than his turret. The twin, 50 calibers in his hands, roared like dragons, the recoil hammering against his shoulders with each burst. Empty brass shells cascaded around his feet, bouncing and rolling across the floor of the fuselage. Through his gun sight, he tracked a Messerschmitt making a high side pass. He led the target, squeezed the trigger, and watched his tracers converge on the fighter's wing root. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wing folded backward like a closing book, and the Messerschmitt tumbled into a flat spin, trailing pieces of aluminum and fabric. Irish didn't celebrate. There was no time. Another fighter was already lining up. "Bandit, 6 o'clock low," the tail gunner screamed over the intercom. Rosie felt the bomber shudder as the waist gunners opened fire. The smell of cordite filled the cabin, mixing with hydraulic fluid and the metallic taste of adrenaline. Through his side window, he watched a Focke-Wulf disintegrate under concentrated fire from 3 different B-17 seconds, the fighter pilot never knowing which bomber had killed him. This was the reality that German intelligence had failed to grasp. The B-17's defensive armament wasn't designed for individual duels. It was designed for collective murder. Each bomber protected its neighbors, creating overlapping fields of fire that transformed the entire formation into a single, massive weapons platform. The technical term was combat box formation. The practical term was meat grinder. Sergeant Walter Braun of Jagdgeschwader 51 made his attack run from dead ahead, the classic head-on pass that the Luftwaffe had perfected over years of combat. He came in at the same altitude, nose to nose with a B-17, closing at a combined speed of over 500 miles per hour. He had exactly 3 seconds to fire before he had to break away or risk collision. He opened fire at 800 yards. His 20mm cannons tore chunks from the bomber's nose. He saw the plexiglass shatter, saw the bombardier's station explode in fragments. But he also saw the nose gun tracking him, rock steady despite the damage. Behind the gun was Staff Sergeant James Murphy, a farm kid from Iowa who had been loading hay bales since he was 12 years old. His arms didn't shake. His aim didn't waver. Murphy fired a burst that lasted exactly 2 seconds. That was all it took. 4 rounds stitched across Braun's fighter, from prop spinner to cockpit. The 3rd round went through the instrument panel. The 4th went through Braun's chest. The Messerschmitt flashed past the bomber at a closing speed of 500 miles per hour, so close that Murphy could see the red leather of the pilot's seat, the black cross on the fuselage, the rivets holding the metal skin together. Then it was gone, tumbling earthward, with a dead man at the controls. Murphy's hands were steady as he reloaded. His first kill. He felt nothing except the cold and the need to keep shooting. By noon, the Luftwaffe had committed over 300 fighters to the battle, the largest concentration they had ever assembled against a single bomber formation. They came in waves, attack after attack. Fighters stacked at different altitudes, like floors in a building of death. And the bombers kept flying, kept shooting, kept bleeding. A B-17 named Knockout Dropper took a 20mm shell through the No. 3 engine. The engine exploded, but the bomber stayed in formation. Another round severed the hydraulic lines, and red fluid sprayed across the wing like arterial blood. Still, they flew on. The ball turret gunner, a kid from Texas named Billy Hawkins, hung suspended beneath the fuselage in his plexiglass sphere, watching fighters attack from below. His turret could rotate 360 degrees, and he used every degree of it. When a Messerschmitt tried to exploit the bomber's blind spot underneath, Hawkins rotated his turret and opened fire at point-blank range less than 100 yards. The fighter's canopy shattered, its propeller shredded, and then it rolled inverted and fell away, trailing fuel that ignited into a comet's tail of fire. Hawkins was 19 years old. He had been in combat for 11 minutes. He felt like he had aged a lifetime. "Fighters breaking off!" the tail gunner suddenly shouted. "They're pulling back!" For a moment, nobody believed it. Then, Rosie saw it through his cockpit window, the German fighters peeling away in pairs, heading back toward their bases. The sky that had been full of tracers and smoke and death suddenly went quiet, empty except for the drone of American engines. Irish O'Brien slumped against his gun mount, his arms burning from the recoil, his ears ringing despite his leather helmet. He looked down at his guns. The barrels were so hot, they glowed dull red. Spent shell casings covered the floor 3 inches deep. "Count off," Rosie ordered over the intercom. "Everyone check in." One by one, the crew reported in. Bombardier wounded but functional. Navigator okay. Radio operator okay. Waist gunners 1 wounded, 1 okay. Ball turret okay. Tail gunner okay. They had survived the first wave. But they were still 150 miles from the target, and the Luftwaffe was just getting started. Behind them, they left something the German fighter pilots had never seen before. A sky full of their own fighters, falling. Major Heinz Nock, watching from his cockpit as he climbed for altitude, counted 17 parachutes blooming white against the dark earth below. 17 German pilots who would not be flying tomorrow. And the American bombers? They just kept coming, their formations barely disrupted, their guns still hot and ready. For the first time in his career, Noak felt something he had never experienced in combat before. Doubt. The Americans had turned their weakness into strength, their slowness into patience, their vulnerability into a weapon, and they were only getting started. At 25,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Germany, the bomb bay doors of 230 B-17 seconds swung open like the jaws of mechanical whales. Below them, the Kugelfischer ball-bearing plant sprawled across the industrial landscape, a factory complex that produced half of Germany's precision ball bearings, the tiny steel spheres that kept every German tank, aircraft, and vehicle operational. Destroy this plant, and the Nazi war machine would grind to a halt. That was the theory. The reality was that to destroy it, they had to fly straight and level for exactly 6 minutes, while flak gunners on the ground tried to blow them out of the sky. "Bomb bay doors open," Rosie reported, his voice steady despite the fact that his heart felt like it was trying to punch through his ribcage. "Bombardier! It's your airplane!" Below, German flak batteries opened fire. The 88mm guns could fire 15 rounds per minute, and there were over 60 guns defending Schweinfurt. Each shell climbed to altitude and exploded into 1,500 pieces of white-hot shrapnel, creating black clouds of death that the bombers had to fly through. The explosions were close enough to rock the aircraft, close enough that Irish could see the orange flash at the center of each blast. A nearby B-17 named Heaven Can Wait took a direct hit to the wing. The entire wing section simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant. The bomber rolled inverted and began its death spiral, 10 men riding a coffin toward the earth. No parachutes appeared. There wasn't time. "Steady," the bombardier called. Steady. Steady. An eternity compressed into 6 minutes. Then, bombs away. The B-17 lurched upward as 6,000 pounds of high explosive dropped free. Across the formation, 1,380,000 pounds of bombs fell toward the factory below. The bombardiers had done their job with brutal precision. The factory disappeared beneath a carpet of explosions that merged into a single roiling inferno. But the price of that accuracy was written in the sky above. 17 bombers had been shot down over the target. 170 men were dead or captured, and they still had to fly home. "Form up," the lead navigator ordered. "Heading 270. Let's get the hell out of here." The return journey was when the real nightmare began. The Luftwaffe had learned. They had analyzed the first wave attacks and adapted their tactics with a cold efficiency that made them the most feared air force in the world. No more solo attacks. No more glory hunting. They came in waves of 20 or 30 fighters, all attacking simultaneously from different angles, overwhelming the defensive fire through sheer numbers. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, commander of Jagdgeschwader 54, briefed his pilots with brutal honesty. "We cannot avoid their guns, except that you will be hit. Your job is to press the attack long enough to kill the bomber before your aircraft fails. Some of you will not return. But if we break this formation, we break their ability to bomb our homeland. Now get in your aircraft and do your duty." 23 pilots took off on that mission. 14 would land. At 1:47 p.m., the second wave hit like a hammer. They came from the sun, a classic maneuver that made them invisible until the last second. Irish never saw the fighter that nearly killed him. He only heard the sound, a metallic shrieking, as 20mm shells tore through the fuselage 6 feet behind his turret. The round punched through the radio operator's station, through a support beam, through the auxiliary fuel tank, miraculously without igniting it, and out through the floor. The radio operator, Sergeant Mike Chen from San Francisco, looked down at the hole between his feet. Through it, he could see Germany passing by 25,000 feet below. He could feel the 200-mile-per-hour wind sucking at his boots. "I'm okay," he reported over the intercom, his voice shaking. "I'm okay." But the bomber wasn't. Oil pressure on number 2 engine was dropping. Hydraulic pressure was gone. The rudder controls were sluggish, and they were still 400 miles from England. All around them, the formation was disintegrating, not from lack of courage, but from accumulated damage. B-17 could absorb tremendous punishment. There were documented cases of aircraft returning with one engine dead, half a tail blown off, and hundreds of holes in the fuselage. But every bomber had its breaking point. Hell's Angel broke formation with both port engines dead, dropping out of the protective formation like a wounded bird leaving the flock. The German fighters swarmed it instantly. The crew fought back with everything they had, their guns blazing even as their aircraft fell. They shot down 3 fighters before a Messerschmitt's cannon shell detonated the bomb bay fuel tanks. The B-17 exploded with such force that the flash was visible for 20 miles. No parachutes, no survivors, just debris falling like rain. Rosie forced himself to look away. Looking away meant survival. Looking away meant making it home. Looking away meant not thinking about the fact that he had played poker with that crew the night before. "Lieutenant, we got a straggler at 4 o'clock low," Irish called out. "She's losing altitude fast." Rosie looked. The bomber was Thunderbird, piloted by his friend Captain Marcus Webb. Both starboard engines were dead. The entire right wing blackened with oil and hydraulic fluid. She was dropping out of formation, and 6 German fighters had already spotted her. The rule was simple. Maintain formation integrity. Don't break formation to help stragglers. Breaking formation meant dying. Rosie broke formation anyway. "Hold on!" he shouted to his crew, pushing the control yoke forward. "We're going after her!" "Are you insane?" his co-pilot yelled. But he was already adjusting throttles, banking the bomber into a diving turn that made the airframe groan in protest. They descended on Thunderbird like a guardian angel wrapped in aluminum and fury. Irish's guns opened up before they were even in optimal range, tracers arcing across the sky in brilliant streams of light. The attacking Messerschmitts scattered, surprised by the sudden appearance of fresh opposition. But one German pilot was either too committed to his attack run or too brave for his own good. Lieutenant Friedrich Wojciech pressed his assault on Thunderbird even as Rosie's bomber dropped toward him from above. 2 B-17 seconds. 20 guns, all firing at once. Wojciech's fighter lasted exactly 4 seconds. The combined fire from both bombers hit his aircraft with the force of a falling building. The Messerschmitt didn't explode. It disintegrated, transformed from a functional aircraft into a cloud of metal fragments in the space between heartbeats. "Form on us," Rosie called to Thunderbird over the radio. "We'll get you home." Webb's voice crackled back, weak but grateful. "Roger that. My crew thanks you." But the gesture hadn't gone unnoticed. 2 more fighters peeled off from the main battle, vectoring toward the pair of B-17 seconds now flying alone, separated from the formation. Billy Hawkins, in his ball turret beneath the fuselage, saw them coming. "2 bandits, 7 o'clock low, climbing fast." The fighters split up, attacking from opposite sides simultaneously. It was a coordinated assault, perfectly executed. In the confined space of his turret, Hawkins rotated desperately, trying to track both targets at once, knowing he could only shoot at one. He chose the Focke-Wulf on the left and opened fire at 300 yards. His tracers walked up the fighter's fuselage like glowing footsteps. He saw pieces fly off the aircraft, saw the propeller shudder, saw the Messerschmitt on the right open fire. A 20mm shell hit the ball turret dead center. The plexiglass exploded. Shrapnel tore through Hawkins's left leg and shoulder. Blood sprayed across the inside of the turret, freezing instantly in the -50-degree air. But Hawkins didn't let go of his guns. Through the pain, through the shock, through the knowledge that he was wounded in a glass sphere hanging beneath a bomber, 25,000 feet above enemy territory, he kept shooting. His final burst caught the Messerschmitt's engine. Oil exploded across the fighter's windscreen. The German pilot pulled up hard, breaking off the attack, his aircraft trailing smoke. "Ball turret to pilot," Hawkins gasped into his intercom. I'm hit bad. "Can you get out of there?" Rosie demanded. Hawkins looked at the manual crank that rotated the turret to align with the hatch, looked at his left arm hanging useless, looked at the blood pooling in his boots. "Negative," he said quietly. "I'm staying here, but I can still shoot." For the next 40 minutes, as they flew toward the coast, Hawkins remained in his turret, wounded and freezing, his hands welded to his guns by a mixture of blood and ice. 3 more fighters made runs at the bomber pair. Hawkins fired at all 3, scoring hits on 2. When they finally crossed the English coastline, Irish looked down through the bomb bay at the ball turret below. Through the shattered plexiglass, he could see Hawkins slumped over his guns, unconscious from blood loss, his hands still locked in firing position. They had made it. But the cost was written in blood and fire across 900 miles of European sky. Behind them, 17 German fighters would never fly again. But ahead of them, stretching across the English Channel, were the contrails of 169 B-17 seconds, more than 60 bombers less than had taken off that morning. 600 men had died, hundreds more were wounded, and tomorrow they would do it all again. Because the mission wasn't over, the war wasn't over, and the Luftwaffe, bloodied but unbroken, was already preparing its revenge. The wheels of Rosie's riveters touched English soil at 4:47 p.m. The bomber had been airborne for 7 hours and 32 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft the moment it stopped rolling. They found 187 holes in the fuselage. The number 2 engine was held on by 3 bolts. 3 bolts that had somehow survived 900 miles of combat flying. The hydraulic system was completely destroyed. 1 wing had a hole large enough to crawl through. The crew chief stood beneath the bomber, shaking his head in disbelief. "She shouldn't have made it back," he muttered. "By every law of physics and engineering, she should have come apart over Germany." But she hadn't. And that was the story of the B-17 inches, a single sentence. Billy Hawkins was rushed to surgery. Doctors removed 17 pieces of shrapnel from his body. His left arm would never regain full function. He was 19 years old when he climbed into that ball turret. He was something else entirely when they pulled him out, something older, something harder, something that would wake up screaming for the next 40 years. But he was alive. Across the airfield, the returning bombers were counted. Then counted again, because the numbers seemed impossible. Of the 376 B-17 seconds that had taken off that morning, only 229 made it back to England. 60 bombers lost. 600 men dead, wounded, or captured. The largest single-day loss in the history of American aviation. The mission would later be called Black Thursday, though it actually occurred on a Tuesday. History has a way of getting the details wrong while capturing the truth. Lieutenant Rosenthal sat in the debriefing room, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he couldn't taste, answering questions from intelligence officers who seemed impossibly young and impossibly naive. They wanted tactical details, kill counts, target assessment. They wanted to reduce 7 hours of hell into checkboxes on a form. "Did you observe the bombing results?" an intelligence captain asked, his pencil poised. Rosie stared at him for a long moment. "I observed 17 bombers explode," he said quietly. "I observed men burning alive at 25,000 feet. I observed a ball turret gunner shoot 3 fighters while bleeding to death. That's what I observed, Captain." The room went silent. But here's what the intelligence officers couldn't put in their reports, couldn't quantify in their after-action summaries. Something had changed in the sky over Germany on August 17th, 1943. Something fundamental. The Luftwaffe had entered that battle believing American bombers were easy prey. They left it with a very different understanding. In a hospital in Stuttgart, Captain Wilhelm Straub lay in a bed with his left arm in a sling and 3 broken ribs from his emergency landing. His Focke-Wulf had been declared a total loss damage beyond repair. When his squadron commander visited, Straub told him something that would be repeated in Luftwaffe briefing rooms across Germany in the weeks to come. They're not just bombers. They're weapons platforms. Every single one of them is a fortress, and when they fly together, They create a wall of fire that nothing can penetrate without casualties. We shot down 60 of them, yes, but how many fighters did we lose? How many pilots? The official German records listed 35 fighters destroyed. The real number was probably closer to 50, but the Luftwaffe had learned the same lessons as every military throughout history. Casualty reports are always optimistic. More importantly, they had lost something that couldn't be quantified: their psychological advantage, the swagger, the certainty. Before August 17th, German fighter pilots attacked American bomber formations with the confidence of apex predators. After August 17th, they approached with the wariness of soldiers entering a minefield, because now they knew. The slow bombers had teeth. The strategic impact of the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid was complicated. Yes, the ball-bearing factories were devastated. Production dropped by 67%. German tank and aircraft manufacturing was disrupted for months. But the cost 60 bombers in a single mission was unsustainable. At that attrition rate, the entire 8th Air Force would be wiped out in 6 months. The solution came in early 1944 with the arrival of long-range fighter escorts P-51 Mustangs that could accompany the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. With fighter protection, bomber losses dropped from 15% per mission to less than 2%. But the men who flew those early missions, the men who proved that daylight precision bombing was possible, they did it without escorts. They did it with nothing but their training, their courage, and their guns. Irish O'Brien flew 43 more missions before his tour ended. He returned to South Boston, opened a boxing gym, and never spoke about the war except once a year, on August 17th, when he would raise a glass to the crews who didn't make it home. Billy Hawkins spent 11 months in hospitals. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Purple Heart. He used his veterans' benefits to go to college, became a high school teacher, and every year he told his students the same thing. War is not glorious. War is not adventure. War is young men killing each other because old men couldn't find another way. Remember that. Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal flew 52 combat missions, more than double the required 25. He became one of the most decorated pilots in the 8th Air Force. After the war, he returned to Brooklyn, became a lawyer, and married that girl whose photograph he had carried. He lived to be 89 years old. When asked once what he wanted people to remember about the B-17 crews, he said this: "We were scared every single day. Every mission. We thought we were going to die, but we kept flying because the men beside us kept flying. We weren't heroes. We were just kids who didn't want to let each other down." The B-17 Flying Fortress became legend. Of the 12,731 built during the war, only a handful remain flying today. But the men who flew them, who bled in them, who died in them, the Luftwaffe pilots who survived learned to respect the bombers they had once mocked. Many wrote in their post-war memoirs about the skill and courage of the American gunners, about the way those slow bombers could fight back with a ferocity that matched any fighter aircraft. Captain Strybe, the pilot who had called B-17 seconds pigeons, survived the war. In 1957, he attended a reunion of Allied and German pilots. He met an American ball turret gunner who had shot him down over Hamburg in 1944. A different mission, a different bomber, but the same deadly dance. They shook hands. And Strybe said something that would have been unthinkable in 1943. "You were the most dangerous men I ever faced in combat. We hunted you, but you made us pay for every single kill. You turned defense into offense. You turned vulnerability into strength. We underestimated you once. We never made that mistake again." The final toll of the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid was staggering. 60 bombers lost. 600 men killed or captured. But the mission succeeded. The factories were destroyed. And more importantly, a message was sent that echoed across every Luftwaffe airfield in Europe. The Americans could be hurt. They could be bloodied. They could be shot down by the dozens. But they could not be stopped. They would keep coming, keep bombing, keep fighting. And every single time the Luftwaffe rose to meet them, they would pay a price measured in pilots and aircraft that Germany could not afford to lose. In the end, it wasn't the speed of the B-17 that mattered. It wasn't the altitude, or the bomb load, or any single technical specification. It was the men inside those aluminum walls, boys from Brooklyn and Texas and Iowa, who turned a slow bomber into a weapon that the finest air force in the world learned to fear. The Luftwaffe pilots had mocked the slow bombers. The B-17 gunners taught them why that was a fatal mistake, and the lesson was written in fire across the skies of Europe, in a war that would be remembered long after the last bomber had fallen silent and the last gun had cooled.